If I need a second one, we're in trouble. I was gonna make a Game of Thrones reference, but it would be lost on you.
When we retire, we've talked about it, we're gonna fully invest, because then Commissioner will either be out of there older or something. Because, from what I understand, it is not a show for him to stroll in on accidentally.
Let me know, I've got all the seasons on DVD.
Do you?
I do. Because it was before we had good internet. And
The only way you could watch that stuff was.
right, because it would keep freezing or it would take forever to download or whatever, so I just went bottom. And everybody's right, the ending is great, but the journey to get there is.
That's more than enough. I don't have the camera.
So it's everything. Just use your face.
So in a somewhat unusual move, I'd like to call the meeting to order. In light of the fact that we do not have the chair and vice chair here this evening, the rules do not specify a third backup, and so I'm just calling the meeting to order with my gavel. And I'm going to, the first order of business is to select a commissioner to run the meeting this evening. And so I would like to ask for volunteers if anybody would like to fill that role. Earl, would you? Any objections?
Good. Well, the meeting's already been called to order, so roll call of members.
Holin,
Here.
Kaplan. Lemaire is absent. Lucas. Miles. Miller is absent, and Wyman. You have a quorum. And then I will also remind commissioners, per the recording, if you guys don't mind speaking into your mics, that would be greatly appreciated.
And stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is audience participation period, and I don't think we have anybody, so we'll skip past that. The next is the consent agenda, approval of the minutes. Anybody have any comments? All in favor? Aye. Minutes are approved. Now, as I understand, the vacation of the city's interest in the bridle path has been postponed and deferred. We have to take action, to defer it. Okay,
Go ahead. Yeah, you have to vote to continue to a later date.
okay. Is there anything you want to say about that, about why? I mean, you kind of sent us an email, but for the record.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's fine. Sorry, can you all hear me? New technology, first time back. To that point, the staff received a notification from the applicant that they have a scheduling conflict this evening, and so are unable to attend, and would request that planning and zoning continue their case to the July 13th hearing date.
Was the schedule conflict the Colorado Avalanche?
It was unspecified.
To clarify, if they were sports fans, moving it to July 13th would be problematic, as that's the All-Star game night as well.
Oh, interesting.
So if there's.
If that date is not good for the commission, that's something to keep in mind.
Be here that day. Won't be, oh, well, I'll be at the game. I didn't realize that.
Are there any others? And I mean, that's actually probably a pretty good point. I mean, obviously, if we're not going to have a quorum, I'll be here, but I don't know about everybody else, so.
we- That's fine. In that scenario, we would just recommend continuing it to a date uncertain. And then we can work with commission between now and then to, one, see if there's a quorum. If there's not, then we can move it to the next meeting date.
Okay. Any discussion?
Now, what the hell, man, people have had the property for 31 years, what's the rush?
Then entertain a motion to continue that hearing, the vacation of that easement until a date uncertain.
Need a motion?
Yeah, that just. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? So that passes. Next item of new business is the Planning and Zoning Commission Rules of Procedure update. And who's going to do that?
That is going to be me.
Great.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. As you know, my name is Ethan Westbrook, and I'm with the Community Development Department. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Planning and Zoning Commission Rules of Procedure update. The last update that occurred for the Rules of Procedure was in the year 2017. We're proposing these updates tonight to establish commission practices and operations that are shown currently. Those proposed updates include changing the order of business, changing the regular meeting time, eliminating the fourth Tuesday of each month meeting date, and changing the commission's regular review timeframe of the master plan. If everybody will turn to page 2 of the Rules of Procedure under Exhibit A, you notice under Article 7, Order of Business, several updates, including the elimination of item presentations, as well as the additions of unfinished business, consent agenda, and new business. These changes are to better reflect the current practices of the commission, as well as be more consistent with other city boards and commissions, as well as city council. Next, if everybody will turn to page 3 of the Rules of Procedure, under Article 8, Meetings, you'll see 2 updates. The first being the regular meeting time change from 6:30 PM to 5 PM. That meeting time change has come about due to previous commission discussion to meet the commission's needs. The second item that you'll see is the elimination of "and fourth" in text. That is to eliminate this fourth Tuesday of each month regular meeting due to the commission not meeting on the fourth Tuesday of each month. The commission only meets on the second Tuesday of each month regularly. Lastly, on page 4 of the Rules of Procedure, under Article 11, Master Plan Annual Reviews, in the first sentence of Section 1, you will see the elimination of the text "in May of each year" and the addition of "periodically" at the end of the first sentence. Those changes are to better reflect, are to better reflect the current practices of the commission, as well as provide flexibility for the commission on when those annual reviews for the master plan take place. With all that said, staff is recommending approval for the provided updates of the Rules of Procedure, but would like to open up for questions if you would like.
Questions for staff?
Do you envision any possibility of having to add an additional meeting during the course of the month? Not that I'm rooting for it, but a number of years, when I first started on, we would meet on second and occasionally on fourth Tuesday. We haven't had a fourth Tuesday meeting since I don't know when, COVID notwithstanding. But you never know when some event is going to pop up that is going to require attention. Is there any provision which would allow a special meeting to be held if needed?
Yeah, so even though the elimination of the fourth Tuesday would be occurring if you guys approve, the bylaw still allows for special meetings to occur with proper notice, of course. I believe it's 48 hours. So if an event or a certain case did pop up, we could hold a special meeting based off of the commission's availability.
And just out of curiosity on that, because I mean, I noticed that, and it says that it can be called by the chair or any three members of the commission. Just out of curiosity, I mean, obviously, the chair could just call the meeting, but three members, how does that work without violating the open laws? I mean, how does that happen?
I think that could take place individually through the city manager, staff liaison, but you make a good point in regarding open meetings laws, preventing them from being violated. Those would have to occur at a regular meeting to decide when that special meeting would occur.
Yeah, because the thing is that, and this is always kind of my deal about rules, regulations, or ordinances. If it says it, do it, and if it doesn't say it, then change it. It seems like somebody else would be calling it and calling up the individual members saying, hey, would you request it? Which doesn't really seem right to me. So, I mean, what do we think about that? I mean, we're here making the changes to the rules of procedure. Do we want to make a change to?
Yeah, and certainly now's the time, just as one that would be involved, we'll call it, with an application that may be on a different time frame than what would be adopted. We would, Ethan and myself as staff, we would coordinate individually with the planning commission members and the applicant to try and avoid those open meetings laws. And so it would be a little more onerous on staff to just do those one-on-one communications, but that's how it would unfold, if you will.
And then, so then what you'd contact and then request that those individual members would request the meeting?
A likely scenario that plays out in my head is the applicant says, for whatever reason, we can't wait till the next planning commission hearing, X, Y, or Z. We would say, okay, let us reach out to the commission and check their availability, assuming there's availability and a quorum. Then we would follow the procedures for scheduling that special meeting.
Okay. I'm fine with that, I guess. Any other questions? I did have one, and it's probably just because of the redlining, but it looks like we have two number fives. I mean, mine looks like it says 5 unfinished business in purple and then 5 consent agenda. Is that,
I show that as well. We'll make that correction to show the correct order.
I think those are multiple edits.
right? Any other discussions or issues? Then hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the change of rules of procedure.
Second.
Do we, just by voice vote, or do we have to?
We're in person, so we
Yeah, we're in person, so we can do voice vote
Okay.
as long as that's
So
okay
all in
with you.
favor? Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. On to reports. We'll start with Commissioner Wyman and move down the line if anybody has anything. Start with you. Do you have a report? Do you?
No,
Okay. Bill?
I have nothing to report.
Dory?
I have nothing to report.
Britta?
I have nothing.
Nor do I. So now we'll move to the city staff.
Remembering to turn on your microphone is like remembering to unmute yourself. The intention of this is really to kind of get a general sense from Planning and Zoning Commission about restarting the master plan process. We do have scheduled with council to have a similar discussion with them on their meeting next week. But given that the reasons for the temporary pause in the master plan project was the restriction on in-person gatherings, and really the project had gained some momentum, made some progress, but it really got to the point where the next critical step was open houses and public input and neighborhood input and meetings of the Citizen Advisory Task Force. And just given the COVID restrictions and the inability to do that, the collective, we thought it would be a good idea to hit pause on that until such time as we could take those necessary next steps. With the vaccination coming out, vaccination rates increasing, the relaxation of requirements that would prohibit the in-person gatherings, we as staff feel like it's an appropriate time to restart that project, but we don't want to get too far in front of our skis without checking in with Planning and Zoning Commission. So really, we wanted to just kind of have a discussion. If you all feel that it's appropriate to start that, no need for a formal vote or anything. We're kind of just looking for a head nod, a thumbs up, if you will. And then if that's the direction Planning and Zoning Commission would like to go, we can give you some updates just on potential timing and some next steps that we've been discussing with our consultant, Rick Engineering, if you remember. So really, that's what this is now that things are getting a little back to normal, we're here in person. There's more comfort level in having those larger meetings. Obviously, we would have precautions in place, and if folks wanted to wear masks during those meetings, that would be perfectly fine, that kind of stuff. But we really want to hear from you. What are your thoughts about restarting the master plan at this time?
Questions or comments?
I'll chime in. I think it'd be great to get it going.
Mike on?
Oh, how do you turn it on?
Yeah, I see here, down here at the bottom.
Oh, is that on now?
See, I told you, it's like unmuting you. You're like, which button is it?
Bingo. I think it'd be great to start it, and there's probably a time frame. I don't know whether it's 30, 60 days, or whether you take into account, summer and vacations, and to me, it feels like people are getting more comfortable, and for some reason, I just think is it something you ramp up in the fall, come September. But I think it's great to get it going, and I'm just offering an opinion. I don't really care when you start it, but I think, we just need to sort of alert people and give them a heads up and let them know it's coming down the pike again and gin it up, so to speak.
I agree with those words. I think because we've had such a hiatus from how we started and our enthusiasm and everything else, that to jump into a community meeting, everybody in Cherry Hills Village North gets together to discuss the master plan. I would like to see individuals, groups of maybe 6, possibly a dozen, just to get together and give us a sense of what they see the master plan means and how they want to see it survive in the year 2021 plus, decades later or a decade later. So I think we should restart it, but incrementally, as I think you said as well, to the same end.
Yeah, I don't know if it's incrementally, but I do think there's a ramp up of sorts. I'm kind of thinking out loud as I look at this. You can't start it just tomorrow. And I think there has to be some sort of ramp and an awakening. And I think you have to be sensitive to people being comfortable gathering again. I think we're getting more comfortable, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
So I think, to your point, Dory, there's sensitivity that we have to, think about in reopening and getting the master plan. But that said, I'm eager for it to happen. But maybe end of summer, I'm thinking maybe is the ramp up period.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you said that. Just kind of the informal head nod from the two commissioners. Like I said, we've been kind of talking with our consultant, Rick Engineering, on what that might look like to restart. And certainly we understand that there needs to be a reintroduction and kind of what is this and where are we going kind of thing. We had talked with them potentially about doing, to your point, a smaller citizen advisory task force meeting in late July. And that's one of the things we would like to potentially get your feedback on tonight, if the 27th or 28th for that meeting seems appropriate. And at that meeting is kind of trying to develop what do some of those next steps look like, probably some type of an open house neighborhood meeting, something like that, to your point, in the fall. But what does that really kind of look like? What does that kind of feel like? We would want to discuss that more at that Citizen Advisory Task Force meeting, again, where it's a little smaller setting, we can spread out a little bit. So again, starting it up, but not just throwing open the doors and saying, okay, everybody in the city, come give us your input right now. Now, that said, we would, assuming we get the head nod from Planning and Zoning tonight and from council next week, we would probably work with our consultant to launch a project website where the survey that we completed last year would be posted. And so we would start to do some of those reintroducing the topic efforts without necessarily saying, okay, we're going to invite 100 people to come gather and give us their input. So it would be kind of a slower rollout, if you will. The crier, right, the crier article, we would do some advertisement, some type of notification in there. So that's kind of where our heads were with it.
Do we have a statement is my mic?
No, you were on. You were on.
You have to press
No, you were,
No.
you were on. You do have to press it. Now you're off.
Press it. When the red light comes on, you're on.
There you go.
Oh,
Bingo.
okay. Do we have any kind of statement that might have come from our last discussion before we had created those groups that we wanted to get together? Any statement or description of what we see the present master plan as before we start talking about going forward, so that all these, we hope, residents in Cherry Hills Village who believe they understand what we mean by the master plan, but don't have a clear definition in their heads, and how if they had some starter, that they could from there add in their experience here in the village and use that as a way of really positively looking at ways to advance the master plan. I'm afraid to say something like to cure the master plan. I don't know that there are problems. I think they did a pretty good job before. But I'd like to take those parameters and make sure everybody starts with a sense of what they are so that we can move forward and not redo what's been done without really taking a good close look.
Sure.
So Dory, are you, it makes sense what you're saying, but I want to make sure I'm clear on it. You're saying give the folks, something other than the existing master plan to review?
No, give them a description of the existing master plan, because I don't want them to be tied to paragraph by paragraph, word for word, and feel that these are our confines. So I would like to give them a description of what the purpose of the master, what inspired it way back, what the goal was when we finished reading the whole thing, just so that they have some shape there.
Right.
That they could bring their own personal experiences here in the village, because they've changed over the last 30, 40 years.
Well, there's a couple of things there, at least from my perspective. One is a description of what the master plan process is and why is there a master plan. I'd be a bit reluctant to provide a summary of the current master plan because the current
Oh, I
master
agree.
plan speaks for itself.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to interpret that. It's like, here it is, what does everybody think of the existing master plan? But with regard to a description of the process, I think that certainly makes sense.
Is the current master plan on the city website?
Yes.
It is.
But one of the things I was curious about, because again, the wrap-up makes a lot of sense, and the September thing, I think, makes a lot of sense, too. I'm not opposed to getting people together in July, but it seems to me, because I was going to sit back and go, I can't even remember where we left off. And I don't remember where we left off with the survey, and I don't remember what the process was with regard to, were we going to finish it, and then go to the Citizens Advisory, and then go out for, in other words, there is some stuff, I think, that staff's got to do to say, if we gave direction to go, yes, let's start the process, okay, how do you see that going? I'd like to hear a little bit more about, hey, here's what we'll do in June, here's what we'll do in July, here's what we'll do in August. How does that sound? and, then say kind of a yay or nay. Because my guess is there's probably work that needs to be done to re-update the thing, and probably would
Yes.
take all of certainly June and July, and then you're almost at September, right? And so you're kind of ready for more full-blown meetings.
Yeah.
If I-
Seems to me.
If I could just.
Sure.
Before, I'll let Paul completely sort of get into the details of kind of the sequencing we were talking about. I did just want to wrap up the conversation and make sure that staff is meeting the expectations of planning and zoning. The plan does speak for itself, and I completely understand the idea of not wanting to have to reinvent the wheel when a lot of good work has already been done. I would just offer, though, I heard a ton of discussion already from planning and zoning about some of the questions that you felt were left unanswered by the master plan. And I'm just going to throw out the most obvious example I can think of, which is the semi-rural character.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, so what does that mean? We don't want to cut people off from continuing to contemplate those kinds of questions. In fact, I would offer, we don't need to answer that prior to get starting. That is what we're going to be doing when we get started.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that we're hitting the mark of what you're still expecting.
Well, my recollection too is, as we were drafting those survey questions, that we were attentive to the master plan, and in places where we felt that clarification was needed, we either directed people back to the master plan, or we were very thoughtful in the writing of those questions. Although I would say it's probably has some merit to review the survey and see if, given the changes to the world, if there's anything that maybe has changed or that we want to add or take away, or I don't know.
Sure.
Because I, like you, I have a foggy memory of it.
Well, and before Paul gets into the steps, I will just offer this, and this is and I've already heard a couple comments, as we think about possibly having a different mindset towards a process, just be aware that we do have a contract in place with a budget. And, completely re-engineering our public outreach, for example, that would definitely require us to probably go back to council and ask for additional funds. So I'll be honest, we have blown through our survey budget by a long shot. I don't know if you guys remember, but we talked about that like 5 times. So we have definitely gone way past that mark. I do think it has merit, though, for everybody to sort of refresh our memories. And if we want to have an eye on how, maybe with the, post-COVID world, does this change any of that? That would be great. I guess I would request, and it's not my decision to make, I'm requesting of you, that we not sort of make everything under the sun fair game for rewriting. That would stress me out from a budget perspective.
I think we had already started to address, because we had several meetings into COVID, and if I recall, there were a few things that we tweaked out already, saying, well, if the world's changing and everybody's going to be, there are going to be a lot more people online, as an example, or whatever. So I think we had talked about it, but so maybe a good starting point is just a refresher on.
And I do think that the last step that we had was really some email comments, and make sure I'm saying this right, email comments from all of you to us that were not the bigger picture ones. They were just some of the smaller comments that were reflecting some individual red lines you had. And the other outstanding item that was Mike Lemaire, Chairman Lemaire, was going to do some research on his side regarding 2 specific topic areas. And I think with COVID and everything else, that just didn't quite rise to the forefront, which, I completely understand. But those were, so I could make the argument to you with a straight face, the survey could go out today if we wanted. But I think you having just refreshing your memory and understand, because you get calls, right, the day that goes out. So at the very least, I think it would be a good idea to maybe just have a refresher. So I think we could send something out.
Yeah, so you're thinking of just sending it out via email?
To you,
I
yes.
assume to us, and then we can chime in and then keep it between us and the staff and not bring in the consultant.
That's what I was going to say. We just need to refresh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pla-
Bring us
Commission
back
just
up to
needs to come
speed.
back
Yeah.
up to speed.
Yeah.
I do think, it's worthwhile to look at that as well with sort of that post-COVID thing. I know that former Mayor Crispin had a view that she shared at one point and said she thought that the survey would change as a result of things happening during COVID. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it was a good point to look at it with that eye and just go, okay, what kind of happened over in the village over the last year and a half, and does that change anything? I don't know that it does, but if nothing else, though, we as a commission, I think, need to kind of come back up to speed. Where were we? Hey, we finalized it, or no, we didn't, or the last one thing was red lines and we didn't see that. I mean, just where was it left, and let's just get up to speed. And I don't think we need the consultant, so you can save your dough in that regard. Don't you think?
Oh, yes.
Sure, just to make sure that I understand, is, and I came on right as it was kind of hitting the
Right.
pause button,
Yeah.
but I remember, and maybe my memory's foggy, but I remember it not necessarily being content, right? There's big questions to answer, no doubt about it, but there are questions that we can answer through the process. But I remember it mostly being technical comments and things like that. So what I'm hearing then is make sure that those technical comments have been included, and then redistribute that version out for planning and zoning to kind of refresh and yes, this is where we left off, and has there been some fundamental change based on the world post-COVID?
And along with, and I can't even remember if we had this or not, or maybe it's at the beginning of the survey, but then along with, okay, if the survey is ready to go, how is that going to be communicated? What is the recommendation about how that's communicated to the community, to saying, hey, here it is, please respond? Because I just don't remember how, and I think it was to your point, Dory, which is to provide information about what are we doing, why are we doing it, and what's happening with this survey. So some discussion about that as well, because that would be part and parcel, right? Now, what I don't remember as well is, what was our view? Were we planning on going out, we were going to finish the survey and then we were going to go out before it went to the Citizens Advisory Committee? Or was the next thing we were going to then share it with them before it went out?
The plan we came up with reflects our best thinking at the time from a year ago.
Okay.
So if you want to talk about that.
So I think to get a little bit more specific, what we were thinking was, and I think this reflects what we discussed a year ago, in essence, where we could have an opportunity to have an initial discussion, start that process of ramping back up, checking in, refreshing everybody about the big questions, our scope, really what do we want to accomplish, timelines for the overall project, because everything gets shifted now, right? And then conceptually getting the green light on the survey, get that sent out, have it be out for at least a couple of weeks. So it coincides great with the schedule that was brought up earlier. Because then if in September or October we had our first town hall meeting, we don't want the survey to be closed yet. It could be that folks want to come to that to learn more information. So we want it to be out, but we don't want it, so we don't want to have the town hall before the survey goes out, but we don't want the survey to be closed before we have the first town hall meeting. So I do think it lines up nicely with the overall September-ish timeline that was referenced earlier.
I think that's good, but so, yeah, that makes sense. The town hall, you're not calling town hall the Citizens Advisory Committee, right?
No.
So somewhere in there, the Citizens Advisory is going to come in before then, before the first town hall, right?
Yes, that's what we've tentatively been kicking around, is doing a citizen advisory task force meeting sometime in late July to get that kind of feedback.
But that's just
But that-
us. That's
right.
not a public process.
Right, that would just be the smaller group. And then with eyes towards the fall, let's say, with that potential open house where we would have then input from Planning Commission, we would have input from Citizen Advisory Task Force. The survey would have been open for a while and will still be open through that open house, to Chris's point. So that if folks wanted to come and just get more information and then fill out the survey, they certainly could do that.
Because I do think it's important if you want to, because I know there's been communication with the Citizens Advisory Committee, there has been some, I don't know exactly what it is, but when we had that meeting, whether it's late July or whatever, they're going to come rolling in here, and we're going to go, so this is the process we've got in place. We got to tell them what it is.
Oh, yeah.
At that point in time, and what we're expecting out of them, rather than more loosey-goosey, because that is going to, you're going to, those are outspoken people, that this thing is going to really go in a different direction.
What we talked about was actually that very first CAT meeting, what is a master plan? Let's just make sure we're all talking about the same
to Dory's
document.
point.
Yeah.
Right? What is it? And what are we trying, why do communities do them? What one do we have in effect now? And what did we set out with our goals and scope for this one?
That's great.
And that's how we would kick that meeting off. But in some ways, that, doing that before we close out the survey or the open house is a great thing, because we do have the reset option here that kind of serves that same function in a way. I mean, we're kind of resetting it for the CAT, but we're really resetting it for us and staff and you as well, because to your point, we've all had a year break. It'd be great to all refresh ourselves on the key topics. Does that make sense?
Yep, agreed.
Yes.
So what about, we had kicked around the last week in July for the CAT, but it sounds like we could take some other steps in the meantime. Specifically, the big one behind the scenes would be the website, getting all the right content and this website built, and then we could publish that and start getting the community engaged, publish something in the Crier, Facebook, Nextdoor. We could start doing all that before we have the CAT meeting. So I guess the question is, does that last week in July sound too early? Does that sound about right? Does that even work from a schedule perspective? Are people on vacation? What do you think?
Are you talking about a separate website from the cities? Mm-hmm. Because?
Because that way the consultant gets to manage the content, and it's less of a impact on staff. That's what we're paying them for.
Okay.
If we're paying them for that website management, but if we had it on the city's website, let me rephrase that. If we hosted it on the city's website, then everything they generate then has to come through us, and it's, basically extra steps. We still will, from our website, you'll still be able to get there.
So there'll be a link from the city
Oh,
website?
my goodness, yeah, right on the front page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, as far as late July goes, what are we waiting for? Go.
Yeah, I agree. There's going to be vacations, but just keep moving forward. Some people will be out, but I think others will be here.
I think that's right. And you just gave a lot more steps right there in the last 5 minutes than you gave before, which I think is great, because now I know what those steps are, we know what those steps are. There is a lot to be done that you guys have got to do. So if you can get all that done, you can do that the way you just outlined it, and it's the end of July, great. If it rolls into August, obviously schedules are schedules. I'm not going anywhere because we've just got a 10-week lab puppy, and so I won't be traveling for quite some time. So, but that's just me.
I think it would be useful if you have a lot of this groundwork, legwork, whatever you want to call it, done before Labor Day. Because my sense is we're substantially done with COVID. People are going to do what they usually do in the summer and so on. But then come Labor Day, I think people might really be cranked up. And if they're ready to move on it, we ought to be able to give them something and say, here it is, what do you think?
Agreed. And that was certainly in the forefront of our mind is, right, summertime, especially right after COVID, folks are going to be, interested in vacations and time with family and things that we've all missed out on in the last year and a half. And so we really want to do some of this legwork this summer in preparation to really sink our teeth in a public way in terms of meetings and that sort of stuff starting in the fall, just for those exact reasons.
So I think then the commission's giving you staff direction to move in the manner that you just indicated, and
Yep.
it's posted.
Yep, we have enough to move forward, and you all can expect the refresher of the survey in your inboxes here relatively soon.
oh, great.
Council does have to vote, because they actually voted to pause the contract. So they do have to vote to unpause the contract. So
We do that next week?
Yep.
Yeah, so if you, and because they took formal action to pause it, they have to take formal action to restart it. And so it will be a little more formal in terms of the presentation and things like that next week. So that's the reason for that, is it just has to be because it is.
Maybe you want to make sure you tell them that I didn't share this meeting because I scolded them in my last time here when the council meeting. They probably didn't like that. I did.
You're Earl. It's just that.
Okay, any other items, of business? The city attorney's not here, so.
If I could just mention one thing, in order to save some trees maybe, if you guys don't mind, from your packets that we're sending out, saving, if I could have the portion that goes over the trail vacation. If you want to keep them, that's fine. But if you want to give them back, we might be able to save some trees.
So you want them back to resend them, or can we keep them and consider them sent?
Back to me to resend to you guys, because we'll have to make a packet for the next meeting, and then we'll include that same material in that new packet. So you'll get them back.
Okay.
It's just, then we don't have to print it all again.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, you just
But-
got to make sure you get, because I got writing all over mine, so you don't want to give that to somebody.
Yeah, and if we want, yeah, then we'll just have you guys hold on to them, and we'll send out new packets.
And that's fine. I don't know why you just don't tell us to hold on to them, and you're just going to have a line on them saying, refer to your previous packet to save the trees, but, because I'm not going to throw it away. Unless, of course, it changes and it's new,
Sure.
and it might, because I got a comment that I'm going to give back to the city attorney that I think staff needs to address, so, beforehand.
That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. One other quick staff update. We were kind of talking about this a little bit before the meeting started, but just so you all aware, the last meeting we had back in, is that February? Boy, that, January, it feels like a lifetime ago, was a request by Denver First Church to do a rezoning and a plat and a site plan amendment. Oftentimes, Planning Commission wonders, well, why haven't I seen anything, or where's that status of that project? So just to let you all know, Denver First has executed their Good Neighbor Agreement with the Covington neighborhood, which my understanding has made the Covington neighborhood extremely happy. They have agreed to petition to become part of the Covington HOA. But in an upcoming, yet to be determined council meeting, you will see an agenda item on there for a request for an extension to approve, for their approval for their site plan. If you recall, one of the conditions was that they had to enter into a shared parking agreement with Brave Church. They're still negotiating that. We believe that it's still good faith negotiations. It's not an adversarial situation. They just haven't reached terms of an agreement yet. And their approval it only lasts for so long. And the code says that when you get in this situation, the body that approved the original application must approve their extension. And so at a future council hearing, you'll see something on the agenda for an extension to that site plan approval request. And council will make a decision. There are two criteria in the code of what council will need to make that either thumbs up or thumbs down. But just so you all know where that's at, just kind of a status update for you guys.
And that shared parking agreement has to come back to council once they've finalized it,
No.
isn't it?
Unless there were some fundamental change in the nature of that agreement, no.
Okay. That's why I was asking.
I'm sorry?
That's why I was asking if there's a fundamental change in that agreement, if they're negotiating it, it would be different than what we saw.
Right, because that would change kind of the nature, the whole ball of wax, right? And so the short version is that there's been no indication that it's at that level. They've been willing to share information, but only to a certain degree. And so, again, we believe it's still good faith negotiations, but if there were a fundamental change, it would have to come back through for review. But right now, that's not been indicated to us. It's just negotiating terms. So.
Anything else? Then we're adjourned at 7:14.
Well done.
Brilliant.
But now you can call to order the study session.
You're not done yet?
Oh, not done yet? What am I calling to order? Yeah, that's right, we do have a study session. What's that on? Yeah, I'll call to order the study session at 7:15. I guess I didn't bring it. What is it for?
It's for a series of what we're calling housekeeping code amendments.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll call order for that. So do we have to, yeah, there we go, thank you. I don't know what I did with that. So we have to have a roll call of members for that as well?
No, not for a study session.
All right, so then, staff?
Take her away. Again, thanks for joining us this evening. We certainly appreciate you all taking the time out of undoubtedly a busy schedule and a summer evening to come talk code amendments. Exciting stuff. Just as way of background, and a lot of this was already contained in your memo, but why are we here? Generally, staff in coordination with residents, the development community, contractors, a variety of folks. You know, obviously, we get feedback on our rules and regulations, and there's often consistent themes in what we hear. And so we're here this evening to talk about some of those that have been more popular topics of discussion than others, and get your feedback on potential amendments to the code. Why do we do that? For two good reasons. One is just responsible code management, right? The more we can continue to make sure that the code reflects, the needs and desires of the community, the less we have to worry about it becoming out of date. And then to that point, right, it helps ensure that the standards that we enforce on a daily basis through building permits and land use regulations reflect, the needs and desires of the residents. And it is staff's goal to do this on a semi-regular basis. We would love to do it once a year with planning and zoning and then ultimately city council. So this won't be the last of these that you see, but we certainly would love to have feedback in terms of format, discussion. If there's things that you all want to talk about in the code, those are certainly appropriate materials. And before I go any further on this, I do want to say it is a study session, and it is intended to be pretty informal, so don't feel like you have to wait to the end to ask questions as we're going through these. If you have questions or suggestions or thoughts or whatever, please share those as we go through them. It really is intended to be more conversational.
Well, in fact, it has to be, right? I mean, a study session, you can't take any formal action, so.
That's exactly right. I just don't want anybody to feel like they have to save their questions to the end and they're going to forget and that kind of stuff, so. In your packet, all of these were provided, and I'll run through them all. I won't spend as much time on all of them as some of them. There were some that were highlighted in your packet, and I will take a few minutes just to give additional background on what those are and why we gave some more information on those specific ones. But the first one, again, these are intended to be relatively minor in nature, not controversial, things that have been identified that either conflict in other places of the code or could be a little bit more clear or just give some better direction. The first is discretionary approvals. So think of things like a site plan amendment or a site plan. Those are generally discretionary, and the code doesn't give any guidance as to how those should be formally approved by council, whether it's by roll call vote, whether it's by resolution or anything like that. And so what we're offering is that those types of approvals would be required to be approved via, not a reference, referendum. Thank you, resolution. For a couple different reasons. One is it's a little more formal action, a little more by the book, if you will. But two, it makes it much easier for future staff to research previous approvals. It's much easier to research a resolution rather than a voice vote. You have to remember what date the meeting was, and then you have to go through the minutes, and if you have a resolution, it's just right there for you to review. The next series is a series of things we've identified in the definition sections. The first one is in Chapter 16, which is the zoning ordinance. And that first one is related to short-term rentals. There's some inconsistency between the section of the code that talks about short-term rentals and the definition, and what this would do is just correct all references to 30 days. Right now, there's some references to 90 days, and so that would just create consistency throughout the code. And then,
Just out of curiosity, I mean, I thought we just went through a whole update on that chapter and caught all those, but evidently we didn't.
So yeah, I'm sorry, Paul. So the code modernization project, you might recall that undertaking. I've been in another community that literally re-engineered the whole thing as well, and it happened there too. It's such a massive undertaking. You try and catch all the interconnected spots, and when you reorder everything and you take bits here and you put it over there and you take other bits and you put them back in the original spot, stuff falls through the cracks. And you know who finds it? These guys. And so a lot of what you're going to see here tonight is really trying to do what I would call expected work of cleaning up those loose ends that we find. The work, most of these housekeepings, not only for tonight, but in the future, we're not talking about earth-shattering types of issues that will end up on the front page of the Denver Post. This is just the good, honest, day-to-day work of making sure that our code is consistent and has internal consistencies. So it's not that the code modernization process missed these. I would offer to you that I think you should expect this kind of cleanup work after such an undertaking.
it just is such a massive undertaking that sometimes things don't always align. And that's why we like to do these, is to make sure that they do. The next one is, right now, the way that the definition for an accessory structure is written, it includes things like standalone barbecue pits and fire pits and things of that nature. And that's, in staff's evaluation, it's not really the intent of what an accessory structure is. And, right, it doesn't have the same impacts as a shed or a pergola or things like that. And so this would provide additional clarity that those types of improvements are not included in an accessory structure definition.
It's one of the items that you have further down in this proposed Amendment 7.
Uh-huh.
Accessory structure, it has to be accessory to a primary use, presumably. That's not stated here on this part. It is on the part that you sent to us, but in your what you've got on the screen right now. When I already see a conflict here, but it's one that I don't understand. Well, if I can read this proposed Amendment 7, amend the code to address accessory structures, sports courts, pools, gazebos, et cetera, on lots without a primary structure theme. But on what you've got on the screen right now, the term primary structure, I don't think occurs. So I'm a little confused. Is this referring to your proposed Amendment 7, or is this something else?
No, this is standalone from the Amendment 7.
Okay.
Right, so this, and I appreciate the question because it's an important point of clarification. This is intended just solely to address the definition for accessory structure. The number 7 in the table is really more of a philosophical question about what qualifies an accessory structure and allowing those without a primary structure or not.
Okay.
So thank you. And then in Chapter 17, just updating the definition for the master plan. Right now, the definition for the master plan in there references the specific year of the adopted master plan. It would be great to take out that specific year so that every time we update the master plan, we don't also have to update this definition. It would just defer to the master plan that's adopted at whatever time. In the roles and responsibilities theme, in Chapter 20, which is a new chapter, it's the wireless communication facilities chapter. There's reference in there, likely a typo, that basically says the director needs to execute an escrow agreement, which is basically a deposit of funds that allows the city to pay for our consultants to review them. In actuality, it's applicants that are responsible for that, so that's just a cleanup in terms of who gets referenced in that. And then the one for Planning and Zoning Commission, again, in Chapter 2, it gives Planning and Zoning Commission certain roles and responsibilities. Right now, it does not reference Chapter 20, which is a new chapter in the wireless communication facility. And so this would be just an addition that would add Chapter 20 to 16, 17, and 20, which wouldn't give you all any new authority, but it would clarify that you do have the authority for the wireless communication facilities.
Back to number 5 above for a moment. Makes reference to the director. Who's the director?
Right
Okay.
now, that's me, still.
Okay. So the applicant has to execute an escrow agreement, fine. But if it's an agreement with the city,
Correct.
and the city has to have somebody sign it, and that would be city manager. Okay.
Number 7 is the one that we just referenced. Right now, the code, and this was one of the ones that was highlighted in your packet. Right now, the code doesn't explicitly allow for or restrict accessory structures, i.e. pergolas, recreation facilities, pool houses, that kind of stuff. It doesn't give us specific direction whether or not it's allowed without a primary structure, although historically the city has allowed them on adjacent property without a primary structure. And so this would essentially give clearer direction one way or the other as to whether or not that's something that the city would want to continue to do. The caveat with this would be that if planning and zoning and city council ultimately want to memorialize, if you will, previous policy that the city allowed this, there would likely be some additional restrictions, if you will, on what that means. Because historically, the city has only allowed those when there's the adjacent property owner, right, owns both lots. So somebody doesn't just have a pool and a pool cabana and they live, 5 streets down. So it's generally been when lots are abutting. And so there would be some probably additional code language regulations such like that would be consistent with historical practice. So that's one of the ones that we certainly are looking for feedback on. And again, there was greater detail in the staff report, but that's really what that one is intended to get at. Is right now the city has historically allowed them, although the code doesn't say yes or no either way. This would clarify yes or no either way, and if yes, likely have some additional regulations to them.
And just so the commission understands, staff isn't necessarily pushing for this requirement. I will tell you, everywhere I've ever worked has required to have a primary structure before you can build an accessory structure, for a lot of reasons that probably aren't a big issue here in Cherry Hills Village. So I
It makes
would,
sense, because if there's no primary structure, then there can't be an accessory structure.
By
It's accessory
definition,
to something.
yeah.
So then it becomes a primary structure.
and yet we've allowed them over the years.
And they generally meet accessory structure setback requirements on those lots, but then has other implications about proximity and, right, so you can see where this goes. And to Chris's point, in every other jurisdiction I've worked in, again, you couldn't have an accessory structure without a primary structure for reasons that probably this community doesn't need to worry about. But we do get questions on this occasionally, and the code's unclear about it, and so this is an opportunity to provide some additional clarity.
There are maybe a dozen non-conforming lots in the village, orphan lots, if you will. There are 3 or 4 of them north of Mansfield, all owned by the same family. Some of them were sliced and diced off, and, quarter acre, 4/10 of an acre, et cetera. In some instances, these lots are not adjoining vacant land to the residents. And in the absence of a primary use or something, you could conceivably conjure, you have this orphan lot and somebody wants to put a tennis court there, but with no tie to anything else in the area. So this would be something you want to clean up. That you allow it, or that it's allowed on adjoining vacant land, fine, that I get. But you do have, but there are a couple of these orphan lots. There are a couple more over toward Clarkson. And I think you want to write this in such a manner that these lots are addressed.
Sorry, I was taking notes.
So if, one way to address that would be to allow accessory uses, to write new code that doesn't exist today, that would allow accessory use only on a lot if you have an adjacent lot owned by the same property owner, and nothing else. That actually would represent a change, though, in the village, because theoretically, that's not expressly written in the code, and you could build an accessory structure on the orphan lot you're talking
Well,
about.
same owned by the same owner, or owned by the same owner where there is a primary use.
That's probably a good clarification, yes, yeah. But I'm just saying that even that change still represents what I would call a change, because it would cut off the opportunity to build a tennis court where there's no connection to anything else.
Right, but since we have, maybe at most a dozen of these orphan lots, non-conforming lots anyway, which already, I think, have issues simply because of their size. That's something something we probably want to deal with, because otherwise, at some future point, this thing's likely to blow up.
Side note, can you point out the ones you know of? Because I only know of about 3 or 4. So, not tonight, but some other night or some other day, maybe we can just talk to you on the phone. I would love your historical, institutional knowledge on that.
Okay?
A couple things. I guess I'd like to read the definition of accessory dwelling. I don't see the complete definition in here. Maybe I missed it. But I just would want to read that and.
I'm sorry, point of clarification. Accessory dwelling or accessory
Sorry,
structure?
Accessory structure.
Okay, thank you for that.
Just to see how that
Sure.
relates to what we're talking
Sure,
about.
absolutely.
Secondly, I just wonder if making these changes, if there would be any issues that could potentially come up in the future with our institutional residents who are fall under that residential zoning code, if as we're talking about allowing accessory structures. And lastly, I'm curious more than anything, what are the reasons in the other municipalities that you would not allow accessory structures?
Trying to think of a tactful way.
I'll give an example. I think, as I understand it, you don't want me buying a lot and putting a swimming pool and a tennis court there.
Yeah.
And I live in Denver.
Yeah, my kids
That-
want to do that. There's actually a vacant lot in my neighborhood, and they're like, can we build a neighborhood pool?
That's part of it. The other implications are that you establish an accessory structure, i.e. a garden shed or things like that, that then people begin to live out of or run a business out of, right? Things of that nature. And so those aren't issues that we typically deal with here in the village, but those are some of the higher, those are reasons why other communities don't allow them.
They turn into storage lots a lot of times.
Which could happen.
It could. I think the more likely scenario, though, is an orphan lot getting a swimming pool, right? I mean, in the village. And that still creates challenges, though, I would offer to you, right? So,
You got to put that junk Mercedes someplace.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. So what I'm hearing then is in theory, in discussion, it's a good idea to have some clear direction in the code, but we need to be mindful about having some other regulations that address some of these concerns that I've heard here this evening. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. And just FYI, no language has been drafted yet. We wanted to check in with you all before we went too far down that road. So we'll take all that into consideration as we work with the city attorney's office to draft language. Number 8 is an item that was, to Chris's point earlier, you know, as we've been implementing the updated ordinance for a year and a half now, it's one of those that just didn't get carried over from the previous version of the code, which just clarifies that folks have the ability to have horses in equestrian facilities in our R2 and, excuse me, our R1 and our R2 zone districts, and the R3 and 3A zone districts with certain minimum lot size requirements, just to make sure that there's not a problem with having that type of amenity, if you will, on a lot
By
that's too
that, you
small
mean a
for it.
minimum actual lot size?
Correct, the 1 acre.
Opposed to, you know, like R1's supposed to be 2.5 acres and above, and there's a boatload of R1 lots.
There's a
that
lot of
aren't.
non-conform, yeah. So
Actual.
it is, excuse me, there is an actual reference to, excuse me, to the 1 acre in what was historically done. Now, if Planning Commission wants to have a discussion on whether or not that's an appropriate threshold, we can do that, but that has been the historic practice, and I'm not aware of that being an issue, that 1 acre threshold.
The clarification bit is okay with me. My one question is, are they then subject to limitations on the number of animals that they may have? Just give an example. There was one place on Village Road. It is on the west side. It's a 2.5 acres. It's an R1 lot. And I think they had 7 horses there at one point last summer. And the property looked like the middle of Oklahoma during the 1930s. And that can be onerous for adjoining property owners. You get a windy day like today, you're going to get a mix of dust and horse crap and everything else blowing around. So as I recall, when this thing was redone, there was some limitation as to the number of critters you could have, or is that my misunderstanding?
First of all, I'd just like to say I appreciate your candor, because I appreciate that. Second of all, there's nothing in our land use regulations that says that the number of animals you can have is a function of the size of your lot. The code really relies on the nuisance section of the municipal code, and that's the threshold that would limit the number of animals is if it became a nuisance, and then it would be subject to enforcement, just like any other nuisance.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do have a portion of code, I can't remember this section, but it does state the owner of the property is allowed to board only up to
that's-
2 horses of somebody else that somebody else owns, but horses that they own, there is no limit on that. So a property owner, can have as many horses as they want, as long as they're still meeting the nuisance code. But other horses that are owned by other property owners, you're only allowed to have up to 2.
Thank you, Ethan. Anything further on those ones? No? Okay. Number 9 is another one that was highlighted in your packet, another one that would be great to have some discussion on, which is the neighborhood, sorry, I'm struggling with the name, the neighborhood input meeting, thank you. Right now, Chapter 18, our building code, has a requirement that says that if you are proposing to do certain thresholds of improvements, i.e. a new home, in addition, more than 50%, a second story on an existing 1-story, things like that, that you're required to have a neighborhood input meeting where they are required to notify property owners that are adjacent to them 15 days ahead of the meeting and that sort of stuff. And what we found is that during these times of COVID, where we've been having these virtually, they've been really well received, and folks really like having them virtually because they don't have to take time off work, come into City Hall and do all that. They can, anywhere they have an internet connection, they can attend this meeting. And Ethan and I do these almost on a weekly basis, and we have people attend from all over the country just because of the availability of it. And the code doesn't explicitly say we can't do it, but we're looking to make sure that the code says that it explicitly says that we can do it, just because it is really convenient for a lot of folks, and it just furthers the transparency and starts the conversation between adjacent property owners. So,
Who gets to decide how
Yeah.
it's done?
Who dictates?
That's a good question. My assumption would be that we as staff would dictate that, but I'm interested in what planning and zoning has to say.
What's your question again?
Who dictates whether or not it's in person or virtual?
If I'm a homeowner, I might want to dictate that, and I might want to say, oh, no, I don't want a virtual meeting. It's throwing it out there.
Sure.
Yeah, is why I asked the question.
Right, because, I mean, these do serve the function of getting to meet your neighbors, and if you say, no, I want the personal touch and I want to do it in person, right?
Or,
Or, I don't like my neighbor.
I, of
don't-
course, would never do that.
No, but I think we could add some language in there that would say that it could be staff discretion on whether or not it's in person.
Well, then this proposal would be more a case of you may have a virtual meeting rather than you shall have a virtual meeting.
Yes,
That the shall part is you've got to have a meeting.
exactly. That would
Okay.
be the intent of the clarification, correct?
Yeah, just one really weird question. How would you prevent one of these meetings from being hacked?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
If it
you.
were a Zoom meeting, how would you prevent it from being hacked? And what happens if it is? Weird question, I know.
Yeah, the best answer we have is that we have a track record of a year now. It hasn't happened. Could it happen? Absolutely. If it did happen, we would just do our best to try and as the meeting host, is mute and kick folks out. Ethan, I don't know.
So we only provide the Zoom meeting information to the specific mailing addresses that are contiguous to the property in question or that's hosting the neighborhood meeting. Not to say that potentially a neighbor could share that meeting information, but we try to limit who has that information so a meeting doesn't get hacked.
Agreed. I take note of the good intentions. It's just that in this digital world, all kinds of weird stuff is happening. And it's going to get worse.
Hey, just for edification, because I remember that when we changed the ordinance, we said that if you're going to do certain things to your property, you had to go around and you had to talk to all of your neighbors, which could be done all at once, or it could be done one-on-one. Did it get changed that now it has to be a group meeting with one group meeting with all of the residents? Is that right? Did that get changed?
So, I was just going to say that the code requirement is that they have this, what I would call more of an open house than a neighborhood meeting, where they share basically what their plan is and the schedule of construction and where their people are going to park during construction and all that. But it doesn't say that they can't or they shouldn't, meet their neighbors and do it on an individual basis. Some folks just work better that way, and we certainly
Because
encourage that.
I'm just curious what the requirement was. I mean, because, in the last 5 years, it's always been on an individual basis. Village has had some stuff happening, and, not Village, Vista, and it's always been on an individual basis. And so I was just curious, is that allowed or is that not allowed? I'm assuming it was allowed. I assume that was what the code allowed. And they could have gotten us all together, and I remember probably 6 or 7 years ago, there was one where a whole bunch of people got together. But is it clear? Is it clear in the code what the requirement is?
Yeah, it's usually, when it was in person, it's hosted here at City Hall. So the neighborhood input meeting, the applicant comes, they sit, they have all their plans and architects and everybody else ready. If a neighbor receives the notice and wants to come and learn about it, then they showed up. However, to your point, if nobody shows up, the project goes forward. Right? So it's contingent upon the neighbors to then participate. I'm not familiar with anything in the code that required somebody to do an individual one-on-one communication. Now, I'm sure that they did, because oftentimes when they did show up here, they would already know each other and they'd already talked and they just wanted to see the plans or something. But it's different now. What we're talking about here is the ability to do that virtually. And what would you guys say is the change in attendance? Well, I don't even know if you weren't even
I
really
can't
here.
speak to the change
So
in
Ethan,
attendance, but-
what would you say is the change in attendance since we've gone virtual?
I would say it's increased highly.
Like double?
Easily. Because
Easily.
in person, most of the time, and it could have been neighbors reaching out to neighbors individually, But a lot of the time, we would have nobody show up, and the application would, or the applicant's obligation would be fulfilled. But with the virtual option, we see a lot more participation from neighbors.
I would say at least 3 out of every 4 meetings has people that, again, aren't necessarily opposed to it, but are genuinely curious and just want to see a set of plans.
It gives them an opportunity. I mean, not that it didn't before, but maybe an opportunity that's more appealing.
I would just say, proceed with caution a little bit on that, because I would be willing to bet there are general contractors who run that process, who prefer that nobody show up at the meetings, and
100%.
They've checked that off. And I just think that there's such an influx of, it's not the same population that used to be here, where everybody talked to their neighbors and everybody knew their neighbors, and there are a lot of people coming in from California, not to throw California under the bus, but I think that if your wording is vague in there, somebody's going to come to you and say, wait a minute, who gets to decide if this meeting is virtual or not? I don't want this meeting to be virtual.
And so for my clarification, are you saying that there's advantages to doing it in person? I guess I'm just trying to get it. Let me ask it more direct. Are you in favor of the in-person or the virtual format?
I just think you need to be clear in your language, because if the language is vague, somebody's going to come to you potentially and say, this language is vague. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter, right? Because I guess then you say, okay, yeah, you're right. We don't care if you want to have it in person, have it in person. So, yeah, I guess it actually doesn't matter. But I think somebody at some point could bring it up and say, this language is vague. We don't want to have a virtual meeting, or we don't want to have it in person, either way. And who decides? It's just who decides.
Okay.
Who makes the call?
Okay.
If it's the city or the homeowner or the property owner.
Well, what about adjoining property owners? Would they have the right to insist that it be an in-person meeting, or do they have to just go yay or nay?
Oh, now I've opened a can of worms.
And I guess, because like I say, I was unfamiliar with this, okay? So you're saying, though, that it happens here at City Hall?
Pre-COVID, that was the
Right,
protocol.
and I understand that, and so let's just put pre-COVID outside, and it could come back, and that could change everything, but in the absence of that, why wouldn't you just sit there and go, I mean, hey, the homeowner, the applicant has got to be here, and everybody else can show up here, or they can Zoom in. Why wouldn't you just do that?
We could. I do foresee some logistical issues of trying to get folks that are looking at a paper set of plans on the same page as folks that are looking at a electronic set of plans. It could be done. There's just some logistical things we'd have to.
Just get a
work
bigger
out.
monitor.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah.
We'd almost need a camera or.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know.
Well, then Britta's right. I mean, you got to make sure that this is clear about who gets to decide what and do what to whom. I mean,
And
I can see that being a nightmare.
would,
For
would
you guys.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. That's why we want to have these discussions, is because you all are intelligent people and you're going to think things that we didn't. Would planning and zoning lean more towards staff making that determination or the potential applicant making that determination? I'll play my cards. I think it's better if staff makes that determination, but there's pitfalls with that too.
But let me chime in. I second what Mr. Workman is saying. There are times that we would not just arbitrarily decide without talking to an applicant. We would want to hear, what's your preference? And probably realistically, a majority of the time, we would do it whichever way they would prefer to do it. Are there a handful of times where we've known, before they even walk in the door with a building permit application or neighborhood input meeting request, that there's a neighborhood beef? Yeah, we have. I'm the 25 King, right? I mean, we have definitely known where there is a situation that would not be advantageous to the city if an applicant were to try and sneak through a neighborhood input meeting. So I personally would offer to you, there are benefits to staff being able to override their request. So I would suggest to you that staff should have the final say.
And I don't have a problem with that, but I do think, though, that there needs to be, the city and staff need to be very, very consistent with how they apply. I mean, I'm always concerned with regard to, okay, 5 families come rolling in, and then, here comes, high and mighty, and he gets something different than what you would have done before.
We don't like arbitrary and capricious,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I mean, that'd be an issue for me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then the last one that was highlighted in your packet is number 10 on the slide here, which is kind of a two-parter. The first part is that right now, the code lays out the requirements for public notification for applications that come to Planning Commission and City Council. And the requirements are based on the application type, and they're not necessarily uniform for the different application types. And what really brought this to my attention was the Denver First application. There were different notification requirements for all 3 of those applications. So we ended up just requiring them to do the broadest notification for each of those applications. And the reason for that, and the reason for the proposed change, is that if you have different notification requirements for different application types, it leads to different timing for notification, which leads to then you all hearing, well, why didn't I get this until last week when my neighbor got a notification for this 2 weeks ago, right? And then it also leads to, if there's different requirements for the area that needs to be required, it leads to, well, why did my neighbor across the street get a notification for the site plan and I didn't, but I got a notification for the zoning and they didn't get a notification for the zoning, right? So it just creates additional confusion, and it really puts staff and specifically Planning Commission and City Council in a tough position of what's going on with the notification requirements and why didn't you just do everything the same? And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with the first component of it. So I'll take a pause there and see if there's any questions, thoughts.
Would that also apply to Board of Adjustment matters?
Correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
I think this consistency is fine. But why don't you continue, because I do have one concern, which I'll address later.
Okay.
So I have a quick question. The city attorney obviously approves, yeah.
She's very supportive of this approach, yes. Yeah. Again, nothing's been drafted yet, but conceptually, she's very supportive of it.
I would say as long as the city attorney has blessed it, it's probably whatever notification method the attorney blesses. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second component of this is, right now, the code requires every time there's a public notification, there's 3 types that the applicant has to do. There's a written notification that they put together a letter and send it out to a certain designated area of folks that says, hey, there's a public hearing, here's the time, here's the place, you can come speak if you want. The second is that the property gets posted with a sign, which I'm sure you've seen, right? It says the same thing, notice of public hearing, X, Y, and Z. And then the third requirement is that it has to be published in a newspaper that's quote unquote in general circulation in the village. And that's a perfectly appropriate way to do it. It was an accepted practice for decades in our profession, and frankly, it was a really effective way because everybody got the newspaper, and whether it was in the morning or the evening, you opened up your newspaper and you found out what was going on in the world and what was going on in your neighborhood. Well, fast forward to 2021, the newspaper industry is seeing less and less print, and so folks are going online to get their quote-unquote newspaper information anyways. And so if folks are going to a website to get that notification requirement, it's advantageous for us to have it on our website where we have control over it. And 2, in a post-COVID world, folks have just gotten used to not having a newspaper. And they're much more familiar, right, with all these Zoom meetings and Microsoft Teams and all that. Just the format of electronic notification is a little more in the forefront of their mind than a newspaper. And so this would update the notification requirement to go from a required newspaper notification to a required posting on the city's website. Again, same thing, it would have to be done 15 days in advance of the hearing and all that kind of stuff. And we would do our best to make it as prominent as we could on the website and dedicate a page and things of that nature. Again, we haven't gotten into the details of it, but it's really just a way to, one, try and make it easier for people to find the information. And like I said, with the decline in newspaper subscriptions and getting a physical newspaper, it's just not as effective as it once was. And to that point, there are other communities, they were listed in your packet this evening, that do allow for, or do, I guess, accommodate a website notification as opposed to a newspaper notification. Personally, I think it's the way that most jurisdictions are going to go over time, just because it is more effective. If you're looking for, what's coming up to the Planning and Zoning Commission in the next month, if you're a resident, you're not necessarily going to go to your newspaper and see what notifications are in there, right? You're probably going to go to the website and see what's on there. So that's really the kind of two-parter there. But certainly, we would love to hear your feedback, thoughts, concerns, that kind of stuff.
Notification through the website rather than newspaper, that's fine with me. What about the notification which is currently done in writing with letter, certified mail letter, et cetera? Do you intend to retain that, or is there a way to update that as well? I have no idea what that might be.
Yeah, well, fast forward to, I'm picturing the Jetsons, right? And we have everybody's email and we just send them an email. But the short answer to your question is no, there's no anticipated or considered change to the mailing notification as part of this. That would stay exactly as it is today with first-class mailing, and we haven't pinned down what the area would be yet for that, assuming we unify all of the notification requirements, but likely 500,000 feet. Those are pretty industry standards, so.
Is it first class or certified? Because when I did a development, we had to certify.
It's certified.
it. Okay.
Thank you, Ethan. I thought you were getting ready to say something.
Nope.
No.
Just
Okay, cool.
So any other comments to that?
No, I think it's a good idea to post it on the website and do away with the newspaper.
The last one is really, it's just a typo that we've identified in the code where there's an extra S in follows in that section of the code, so.
We'd like to hear a full, robust debate on this.
Any objections? Yeah.
If any of you are English teachers or your parents were English teachers, we'd love to have your input. So that really is the kind of what we wanted to accomplish this evening. Just as some identified next step for you all, we are going to have a similar study session with council. Sorry, I'll get closer to my mic. We will have a study session with council next Tuesday, very similar to this. Format will be very similar. Assuming that things go similar to how they went with council, as they did this evening, we're going to work with the city attorney's office to draft some proposed language, and then we would certainly bring that proposed language back to you all later this summer, early in the fall, for your consideration with specific red lines and bolded changes and things like that, where it would really be the language that we would be proposing for these amendments. But conceptually, this is what we have in mind. And that's really all I have. So if there's any other general questions or thoughts, or if not, that's okay. I do have one request or one question for Planning and Zoning Commission, which is, moving forward when we do these in the future, was this type of format discussion beneficial? Would you like to see something different? Is there something that you're like, oh, it would be great if you could just do this, that, or the other? And I don't necessarily need an answer on that now. If you want to think about it and let us know at the next meeting or just in the future or whatever. But again, part of responsible code management is identifying these things and getting them fixed. So we do intend to do these with you semi-frequently. And so if there's ways we can improve it or make it more useful or beneficial of your time, let us know and we can do that.
You might recall in 2019 and in the first part of 2020, we had a series of one-topic text amendments. We did the parking ratios. We had another one with,
It was the floodplain.
yes, the floodplain map. We did all these individual ones, and I know it frustrated some council members just to sort of have this steady drip of, text amendments. And so I'm certainly, Paul and I both are familiar with other jurisdictions where you try and be more efficient with your, you put your text amendment hat on, right? You roll your sleeves up and you just sort of plow through of them, as opposed to just having just all the time, and it feels very disjointed. You can't remember what the last one was. Tonight, we had the opportunity to hear the accessory structure and see how they work together. And that's a benefit of doing this kind of housekeeping amendment approach, where you cluster them all at once. And so if you do have thought, I guess we'd also love to hear, do you like this approach? Overall, is this a good way of doing it? It is new for the village, I know
I
that.
think it's a good approach, and I remember every now and again when those things would come drip, drip, one at a time. And obviously, if something pops up that's really, really critical, you do it. But I can see where it's on the calendar, and I don't know if it's once a year or whatever it is, but it's like going, hey, keep your ledger, and in September or January, whatever the month is, a whole bunch is going to come forward, and you're going to do it then. I mean, I think that makes a hell of a lot of sense.
I concur with Earl. The only caveat I'd throw in is when these amendments are done, I sometimes think that insufficient attention is paid to its integration with the rest of the city code. I had the pleasure of being on P&Z back in whenever it was, 16, 17, when Mayor Chrisman said there are 4 segments of city code that need to be redone. And there was that attorney from Fairfield Woods who read through every bloody line and somehow didn't land in a mental institution. But you get public pressure for a particular issue or a particular complaint. And the response, as it should be from council, is, okay, we got to do something about it. So they write a new ordinance without really seeing how it affects the whole code across the board. Now, periodically, you'll do the Fairfield Woods bit where somebody goes through it and starts weeding it out and so on. Whether it's even possible to get that degree of integration with the whole code, I don't know. But I do think that often at times, in response to public pressure, something is just hung on and without regard to how it affects the rest of it.
Agreed, and I've lived that dream, and to the extent we can avoid that, that's always staff's goal, because in the long run, it just ends up creating more headache for you.
The Fairfield and Woods, you hope that it cleans up a lot of that. But the bad news is, for every 30, for every 50 that it cleans up, it accidentally, unintentionally creates one, right? I will give you an example. So we actually have more than what's on your list, that some of them have come up more recently. But we thought, so this being our first go around, let's keep it bite size. But one, just to give you an idea, when the cell tower section, when the telecommunications section was pulled out and created into its own chapter, that's a significant move. And when it lived in Chapter 16, the request for like a variance, a request for relief. Thank you. See, we're both doing that tonight. The request for relief was baked into Chapter 16. Because it was in Chapter 16. The variance process existed. Criteria existed. When it was pulled out to Chapter 20, that whole section that was not contained within the telecommunications section, it was in a completely different part of Chapter 16. It then didn't go with it, right? And that is in no way, that's an honest mistake. But so for every 50 that they clean up, they accidentally leave another one hanging, if you will. And so, and it's not a bad thing. It's to be expected. You can't go through an overhaul that large and not have some hanging issues like that. It's just going to be a part of it. So we're glad. We would love to hear your feedback.
I had a planning professor who once observed that you cannot change just one thing.
That is true. That is very true. That's all we have. Again, thank you all for making time in your evening. We do sincerely appreciate it.
Terrific. Anything else? Then the study session's adjourned at 8:04.
Yeah, if any of you,
else are gonna be absent on the 13th, I would say, please let us know. Because if we aren't gonna have a quorum, the sooner we know that, the better. We'll need to reach out to Mike and,
I was gonna say, I can just shoot an email to you.
yeah, I think we should.
Yeah.
I'm, with our applicants, we need to know as quickly as possible. If we know that's not gonna work.
Yeah, I'll shoot an email out tomorrow to the whole
Oh,
commission.
good.
You might remind them of the game.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
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 No, I really think we should. Hey, we know that Denver's, right, hosting this great all-star game, and let us know if you're not going to be here.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.